Okay, so this video titled Dialogue, the purpose is to help you to understand what dialogue is and why it's important in a story. So let's just review. Remember to pause every time you see the pencil because that's letting you know that you'll need to write something down. Use the rule of 5, get things done in your own words, and always pause as often as you need to, especially when you see that pause button. Okay, so what is dialogue? Well, dialogue is basically having a conversation between two or more characters. We, as human beings, experience dialogue all the time as we talk to each other. Pause and write down the definition for dialogue. So we have conversations every single day. You have conversations with people at lunch, you have conversations with your family and friends at home, in the hallways, and on the bus, and millions of other places. For example, here's some dialogue that you might have heard today. Hey dude, how you doing? I'm really good, you? Good things. Gotta go to language arts though. Ugh. The question is, do you include every single kind of dialogue that you could possibly have in a story? The answer might surprise you. So, of course it's important to talk to each other, and we need to kind of have that dialogue where we have friends and we talk about things, and that's good. But in a story, not all dialogue is equal. So when you're actually writing or reading, you don't want long scenes of that kind of daily dialogue where you're just saying hi or goodbye or explaining what you did over the weekend, because it usually ends up being boring in a story. Instead, readers want to experience something that's outside of that everyday experience. For example, they might want to hear characters say things like making interesting or exciting declarations, or perhaps revealing the whereabouts of some hidden treasure, or something that will challenge each other. Just that everyday conversation doesn't interest the reader. So let's look at what kinds of dialogue you want to include and why you would want to do that. So when you have dialogue in a story, good authors will always include dialogue to do one of the three things, and sometimes the dialogue will do all three. First of all, it should help move the story forward. Basically what that means is that it introduces an event or a piece of information that gets you interested in what's going to come next. The second kind is to increase the tension, where the dialogue introduces information that simply makes the story more exciting. Maybe it's more suspenseful or makes the mystery more interesting in some way. And the third reason you'd want to include dialogue is that it helps to define the characters, that as they speak, you get to know a little bit about them. So let's look at each of these individually with examples. Don't forget to pause and write all that down. Okay, let's look at dialogue that moves the story forward. Please follow along while I read. The phone rang and Jerry picked it up.
Hello?
There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then,
Jerry? Is this Jerry Simmons?
Yes, who is this?
Jerry asked.
Jerry.
The other man paused. Jerry could hear him take a deep breath.
Jerry, my name is Dave. I'm your brother.
I don't have a brother,
Jerry said, losing his patience.
My family died years ago.
Not your whole family,
Dave said. Okay, so look over that again, and in your notes you should have that section where you are writing down first the definition of what each one is and then an example. So you want to answer about how, for number one, how does this dialogue move the story forward? And you'll want to write that where the yellow box is on your notes. So think through this. What happened? How might this lead to another event in the future? Make sure you take time to do that. Okay, so reviewing that little dialogue, obviously right away we want to know who this Dave fellow is and if he's telling the truth and how he found Jerry and why is he still alive and how did he escape whatever and what was it that happened, etc., etc. We want to know what's going to happen next. This really piques our interest because obviously the discovery of anybody's long-lost sibling is going to get you excited and is going to lead to something in the future. What that is, we don't know, but we know something's going to happen next. All right, let's look at the next example, dialogue that increases tension. Again, let's make sure you follow along.
Dave!
Jerry shouted.
We've got to get away from here! The building's gonna blow!
We've got to go back.
Dave screamed.
Why?
Dave pointed at the roof.
Because Susan's still up there.
Okay, so obviously this is going to help move the story forward as well, but let's look at it in terms of how does it increase the tension. So in your notes, next to increase the tension, write down your thoughts of how this dialogue increases the tension of the story. Make sure you pause. Okay, so let's talk about tense here. That little scenario certainly introduces the information that Susan's still in the burning building or whatever's happening there, and it's really a matter of life and death. And because the characters are saying it out loud, it increases that tension. And it gets us to be thinking, well, what's going to happen? How are they going to save her, etc. Okay, the next one. The number 3 is dialogue that helps define the character, so that as you read what the characters have to say, their word choice, what they say, all those things can tell you something about the characters. So listen to this one.
What up, G-Dog?
Mark said.
You got a table for one? I'm starved.
The waiter looked up to see Mark.
Good morning to you, young man. Welcome to our fine establishment.
I've been playing Rock Band for 40 hours straight. I need like 10 sandwiches.
Mark exclaimed.
I am so sorry, but I am going to have to ask you to keep your voice down if we are to provide you with the 10 sandwiches you requested.
Greg said. Okay, so we should be able to tell something about these characters based on the way they speak. So go ahead in your notes, answer the question, how does this dialogue help you to understand these characters? Pause so that you have a chance to actually write it down. Okay, so obviously Mark and the waiter are two very different people, and we can tell this by just the way they talk. On one hand, it's likely that Mark is much younger than the waiter, and he is clearly more hip and excitable. On the other hand, the waiter is certainly far more formal and maybe doesn't know the first thing about the youth culture. I mean, after all, he hasn't even heard of Rock Band. So because just through these few seconds of dialogue, you as the reader can find out a lot about these characters and about how they relate to one another just through some simple dialogue. Okay, that's all. Your last steps are to make sure that you have your summary written and your hot question written on your guided notes, and make sure those guided notes are turned in, and be prepared to fill out the digital whisk. That's all, folks.